Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another FOIA Friday, a community podcast about all things in the world of public records. This month's session is about disappearing environmental data, and the goal is to kind of give you a toolkit to approach the questions that you may have if you're requesting data at the state or federal level and wondering what you should expect in this administration and this time, and are looking for tips and tricks to get those requests successfully fulfilled or to find the data that you're looking for. I have some really awesome guests here today, Bennett, Brittany, and Izzy. Do you all want to introduce yourselves? Maybe Bennett, you can start and pass it to the others.
Yeah, hi. I'm Bennett Goldstein. I'm an environmental reporter and agriculture reporter in Madison, Wisconsin at Wisconsin Watch.
Brittany, I'll send it to you.
Hey everybody, my name is Brittany Janis. I'm the executive director of the Open Environmental Data Project, and OEDP is one of the co-founding organizations behind PEDP, Public Environmental Data Partners, which is the home of the many letter acronym organizations. But we're all working together to protect, preserve, and improve public access to environmental data.
Hi everyone, my name is Izzy Pacenza. I work as a project coordinator at the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, or EDGI, and I also am part of the Public Environmental Data Partners Coalition with Brittany.
Cool. So before we kick things off, I'm going to actually pass the mic to one of Muckrock's awesome CUNY J Corps interns who wrote an article for Muckrock this week that I'm going to post in the chat and attended the federal government's FOIA advisory committee, which I think is something that a lot of folks on this call will be interested in hearing about. So he's just going to give a little bit of background on what he listened in on this week. Let me give him the mic. Oh, he is no longer on the call. Interesting. He was when we started. Let me send him a message real quick, and maybe we'll bring him back in later. Actually, I see a message from him that he was having a bunch of technical issues and he may come back. So, anyway, I think let's just take it back to the topic then. Brittany and Izzy, maybe Brittany, we can start with you. Can you talk about these mini acronymed projects and kind of what makes them different and how to distinguish between them, their origins, and what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, OEDP has been around for about 5 years, Open Environmental Data Project, which is the organization I'm executive director of. And we've always worked at the intersection between communities, researchers, and the federal government to try to make sure that communities have access to the kinds of information they need to be able to make smart decisions when it comes to how to do environmental governance, how to protect their communities, how to build more resilient places. And I'll let Izzy talk about EDGI, which is one of the other orgs that is part of PEDP. But back in 2024, basically November of 2024, once we knew the election results had gone the way that they did, a group of us, OEDP, EDGI, EPIC, which is the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, and a whole bunch of other groups, and eventually some folks that would go on to become the Impact Project, which goes by TIP, um, came together and were, kind of aware of what happened in the first Trump administration. During the first Trump administration, I was working for Environmental Defense Fund. We saw a lot of climate information and data come down. We saw websites get scrubbed of mentions of climate change. We saw access to different environmental tools come down. And so we knew going into this administration that there were going to be changes to the amount of information and environmental data that communities and the public broadly and journalists as well were going to be able to access. And so, because of that, we started building on actually what EDGI had done when they were first founded, which was starting archiving. and trying to pull down as much information as we could from as many different things that we knew were going to probably be in the crosshairs really early on during the Trump administration. And so we had a lot of connections with folks inside of the EPA, inside of NOAA, inside of different agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, et cetera, who were saying, hey, we're EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. We're pretty sure that we're going to get entirely nixed by this administration, just based on what's in Project 2025 and the things that we're starting to hear, particularly as DOGE was starting to be conceived and launched. And so we worked really hard behind the scenes, trying to not only archive as much data as possible, we sort of crowdsourced from different communities, as well as agencies of what was going to be at the greatest risk and what were the things that people were using. And then simultaneously working to identify the tools as well. So not just the data, but not just the underlying data, but also the tools that people used, and tried to, as much as possible, make sure that people in the Biden administration were rapidly open sourcing those tools and then replicating those open source tools on our own servers and starting to stand them back up. So since PEDP has been founded, we've archived nearly 400 different data sets of different environmental data. We are one of many players in this space. There's another great project called Data Rescue Project, which has done a lot of work, not only within the environmental space, but also beyond. And then there's a lot of other players that are working, somewhat more behind the scenes, but who we're connected to try to make sure that any important environmental data that the federal government produced that people are reliant on has a backup somewhere. In addition to that, PEDP has stood up a whole bunch of tools that had been taken down. So things like the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, EJ Screen, FEMA's Future Risk Index, others. And in those cases, it's not just preserving the data, but actually the functionality for people to interact with these things, because most people don't actually go and download a data set when they want something. They actually interact with a federal tool. And that's actually, if you look at the landscape of the change that has happened, where the greatest change has happened. And Izzy's done a lot of great work to talk about sort of, we know a few thousand data sets that have been taken down or have been discontinued, but there's a lot more work in sort of the environmental information ecosystem that has been put at risk that we're continuing to monitor. And Izzy, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your work on that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Brittany. So very similar to Brittany's experience, as I said, I'm a project coordinator at an organization called the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, or EDGI, and our main mission, all of the work that we do falls under the umbrella of advancing the environmental right to know. So what that means to us is we're trying to increase people's access to information, the utility of that information, and people's ability to leverage that information for change, to be in conversation with their representatives and really have a form of environmental governance that responds to them and represents them. I would say one main sphere of work that we do under this umbrella, which Brittany mentioned, falls under the sphere of public information. So we're really thinking about how is information about the environment publicly available to people? How is it safely available to people? Is it going to go away? How does that availability change, and the type of information that we see publicly for people to understand their environment and to respond to it? How is that changing? So a lot of what EDGI's work does, and what I'm very involved in at EDGI, is actually monitoring federal environmental websites. So we have developed tools that help us see how federal websites are changing over time. So we can literally see different versions of the same exact web page at different times. And we have tools that allow us to see what information has been added to those web pages, what has been taken away, and what does that mean? Have entire web pages been taken away? We saw, for example, the complete removal of all information about environmental justice through this type of website monitoring. And then also through this website monitoring, we are monitoring a lot of federal environmental websites and web pages that actually house access to a lot of the environmental data that we are trying to safeguard. So that kind of leads into the second part of EDGI's work, which has been kind of a big part of our mission since we were founded in 2016, which is kind of like the relationship between environmental data and information, and obviously how these two things have really big overlaps. So EDGI was kind of founded in response to the first Trump administration and kind of this idea that probably a lot of information was going to go away. Let's monitor it. Let's monitor what happens. Let's analyze it and let's alert the public to what is happening. In the first Trump administration, I will say we didn't necessarily see the whole scale removal of data sets that people rely on the way that we are seeing now, even though we had, really been preparing to see that type of removal. And then kind of part of the reason why EDGI also helped co-found the Public Environmental Data Partners was because also, as Brittany said, with Project 2025 and with EDGI and all of our other organizations' connections to people in the federal government, we had kind of a good idea that a lot of the data that we didn't see explicitly targeted during the first Trump administration was likely going to be a big target now. And so that's kind of where EDGI falls into this work of data archival and data preservation, is thinking about like, yeah, how can we understand what data should be available to people? Is it going to continue to be available to people? How can we try to safeguard that availability through many different pathways? This could be through policy, through archiving, through trying to make this data more just and equitable and actually serve people that it's meant to serve better and really reimagine a better data infrastructure for the future. So all that to say, that bleeds into many different things, but very much echoing everything Brittany said about how this has been a very, very collaborative effort, and all of our different organizations, EDGI, OEDP, and all of the others that Brittany mentioned, kind of are coming into this mission to archive and preserve and expand access to data from all of our different perspectives and angles as individual organizations.
And to kind of stay on that topic of collaboration, and I know Brittany mentioned the Data Rescue Project, there may be some folks on this call who are interested in participating in archiving and preserving data. Can either of you speak to someone who, might want to do that or might want to be involved? Is there a lane or a way for them to hop in?
Yeah, absolutely. So PEDP is always happy to accept volunteers. In the early stages of this, we had a lot of volunteers that were going and kind of scraping as much as possible. Now we're actually at the point where we have pretty full archives. We are still pulling down some information, but are also trying to do a lot of work on metadata and metadata analysis and making sure that that information's in there. So if you go, I'll first, I'll drop in the link to all of the data we've archived, but there's also, I'll drop in the Get Involved link to PEDP. I know we have, I'm pretty sure, two upcoming data drops that are coming up in the next few months. And so there's lots of ways, if you have not necessarily super advanced scraping abilities, but know your way around a computer enough that you can follow directions. And for those datathons, we will often, have really explicit instructions for how people can get involved in archiving in some way. The other place where we actually are always looking for volunteers, even if you aren't somebody who feels like you can go and archive a data set, is Izzy actually leads our communications working group, and we're always trying to do storytelling as well around what data was lost, how were you impacted by that data loss, and what does that mean in terms of your ability to know that you have clean water, know that you have clean air, to do your work as a postdoc, to do your research. So if you're interested in that kind of community storytelling as well, no technical requirements necessary. That working group also takes volunteers.
Brittany, you dropped that link in the chat, and it made me think we've done on FOIA Friday a couple FOIA Fridays ago. Someone was talking about an ICE data set, and we just kind of quickly explored it real quick. Could you give me if I shared my screen, just like a 2-minute impromptu exploration of the site? Would you be prepared to do that? Just kind of poke around real quick.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, let's
Izzy,
see.
I might tag you in.
Yeah. So just because I was seeing data that I'm already familiar with from some of my reporting, like you mentioned the EJ screen. And so if you want to give me a couple places to look or just show people what they, be looking at, I imagine maybe in the scenario that like, I don't know, say you were looking for the EJ screen data, or this is, there's like climate.us now for what used to be climate.gov. How might you end up here and what might be the best way to get into the data?
Yeah, so I think the way that we see a lot of people interacting with our site is if you go to, let's see, if you do EPA EJ screen, if you click on that, so that is actually the full tool that we've archived. And so if you click use EJ screen, you can actually work on EJ screen and get the exact same data that you previously would get when you were going to the federal site.
Wow.
It says it's an unofficial copy. And so this works just like EJ screen used to work. And it has, the same data. So you can look up flood risk. You can look it up by different indicators, zoom in per different tracks of information. So, for example, if you were a journalist and this was a tool that you previously used, it's still here available for your use. One of the things that we're working on right now is making sure that that data stays up to date and sort of re-engineering the data pipelines that goes into this because not all of those data pipelines are continuing to be collected. But we have the clone, you can see it, the GitHub repository, as well as the data documentation and how all of that's working. And so this talks sort of about what our process has been in rebuilding it, what is the data that goes into it. And we have that for basically every tool that PEDP has stood back up. So within PEDP, the way we get our work done is we have a bunch of different working groups. One of them is data preservation. So if you click on the archive data, you can see all of the different data that we've preserved. There's a big long list that shows the different data sets and where to find them, and as well as the metadata and things beyond that. Up at the top of that, there's actually a place if you have a data set that you're worried about being taken down, where you can nominate a data set and say you're interested in getting it preserved. And so this page and all of the work around it is really the function of our data preservation group. And then we also have our tool development working group that's doing a lot of the actual standing back of tools and the documentation of how those tools were built. And then the blog and other things talk about, our communications side of the work. But yeah, if you're really interested in finding different environmental data that maybe you feel like has been lost, the data and tools place is probably the place you will go.
And a quick question. So for the archive data, is there a process that you're using or had used for deciding which data sets to put the most effort into to stand back up or which tools to focus on? And also, I think it's awesome that you have, a forum for people to nominate data sets as well.
Yeah, I would say that in the beginning, kind of when PDP first got together and became a coalition, we did have quite a process for prioritizing different data sets. We had different kind of like metrics of like the impact of those data sets and like the ease of being able to actually archive them that helped us determine which data sets we were going to focus on. In addition to that, I would say like our network of people who are either formerly or currently in the federal government and other organizations who have been doing this type of work have been incredibly helpful in like nominating data sets, letting us know about data sets that they were like fearful were going to come down in the near future because of any type of information that they already had. And then also I would say that it is like by nature a question of capacity and our ability to archive that data. Like in the beginning, we were getting when we kind of like opened ourselves up to nominations, we would get a lot of people being like, "Can you archive every NOAA data set?" And we had to unfortunately say like we don't have the people, time, resources, space, money to actually do that, but we can, focus our efforts on these very specific data sets that have the greatest impact to communities and people who that are the most public facing and that would be like extremely detrimental if they came down. And then also as being part of like a much larger data preservation network, we are in conversation with other people who have different resources, capacity, people, storage space, who are able to like we can kind of like pass data sets onto each other and kind of understand which data set is under whose jurisdiction and responsibility.
So I guess the workflow for someone who maybe is looking for a data set that they had once relied on and maybe isn't there, or isn't in the same form, or they have questions about whether there's certain parts of it has changed, is to first look at that link that we looked at. Also maybe reach out if it's not there, or even recommend it if it's something that you think might go missing if it is still there.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that that's Totally makes sense. And I think the other thing I'll say is the reaching out is actually probably a very smart thing because there are some archives that we know are going on that have not yet been super public about where their archives are. But Izzy said all of NOAA, there's a lot of NOAA data that's been archived. You won't necessarily see it on our site, but we've been in close conversation with a lot of different groups that have been doing archiving more stealthily than us. But the thing that we're most interested in is maintaining public access to that data, because an archive that is hidden is not actually that useful to that many people. And so we're happy to like help connect you if you are worried about a data set, because we can pass you around the network. And I know a lot of those groups that have been doing sort of the more hidden archiving are starting to think about how they can be more public and allow for more open access for our work. But that was always our number one priority was maintaining the public access, because that's sort of the ethos of PEDP.
Yeah,
Right.
and I feel like similarly, I guess another thing that I just want to mention in terms of like how people are able to like find that we've archived this data or understand that we're doing this work, I will say that our relationship with like journalists and all these other people who kind of like get the word out about our work has been incredibly, incredibly helpful and fruitful for us, especially I would say when like these more public facing data sets that people were worried were gonna and tools that people were worried were gonna go down like EJ Screen, CGES, like we were kind of part of this like public awareness that these things had happened. And then a lot of the times in like similarly for climate.gov, which is now climate.us, like there was so much reporting on the fact that people had come together and stood back up this data and made it publicly available. Whereas like our reach as kind of like a comms organization isn't necessarily as high as like newspapers, et cetera, all these other public facing communications platforms that really do such great work to like get what we are doing out to the public and to get people knowing about it and coming to rely on it and use it.
And I guess I want to talk to you both more also about FOIA requests and how that fits into this whole thing. But maybe before we get to that kind of going in that direction, Bennett, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether your job as a reporter relying on environmental records and data has changed that much over the last years, or how you've navigated some of this stuff that's happening at the federal level as a local reporter.
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, not a whole like I've had just as hard of a time with the Biden administration and EPA, USDA, and Army Corps in records that I needed. I'm still waiting on requests from, 2 years ago. And so I have always just try to avoid FOIA-ing federal agencies like the plague, and just working within states. Because I mean, just generally, it's a lot easier to get them back in a timely fashion. A lot of states, such as where I'm at in Wisconsin, like we have a better FOIA records law than at the federal level with fewer exemptions in some important areas. And I just always felt like with the feds, if unless you were to like immediately file a lawsuit, like upon initial request, you would stay at the bottom of the barrel. Um, so yeah, I guess so. My strategy has always been like first work with my state natural resources agency and other states as well.
And I think for folks on the call, that may make more sense to them understanding that a lot of the really important environmental regulations, like the Clean Air Act, those trickle down into the states in ways that the states then have this data or they're the ones enforcing it. So that will find its way back up to the federal government, but it's also being collected at the state level. And I think when I first started requesting environmental data at a state level, I was like, wow, this is great. They're tracking a lot of stuff because there were these kind of foundational acts that require states to do that. And that's what you're kind of saying, right, Bennett? That like, yes, you could get
Yeah.
this data from the federal government, but the way it trickles down, the states collecting it may be easier to work with.
Yeah, certainly. And then they also update more frequently and more rapidly. So like just the Echo database, for instance, with violations of wastewater dischargers, like the actual reports are going to be with the state. The Echo doesn't, have the actual inspection reports or even just details on the nature of violations. So, and then also I think some of that nuance that comes up that doesn't always trickle into the federal databases, is pretty important, especially if you're doing investigative stories.
Yeah, and I found like that's something that's a little bit complicated to navigate, but I think really important and exciting also as a reporter is like there are these really useful federal databases. I remember for a project I was working on, I had heard from folks in the neighborhood that there was this polluter that everyone in the town was concerned about. And I started looking at like the state and national levels of pollution for the certain types of pollutants that that plant was polluting. And I was like, wow, okay, this is on a really large scale happening at this plant compared to the rest of the country. So I had that kind of national perspective, but then I was like, so what's really going on at that plant? And then I, like you said, I started requesting the compliance correspondence and realized they were in trouble with the state EPA pretty frequently. And so it's not only like, oh, here's the national perspective, how does this level of pollution or environmental damage compare? But then also what's really going on and who's trying to hold them accountable. Um, do you have any specific FOIA requests that you filed recently that you feel like were either really challenging or represent some of the successes that you've been able to have?
Yeah, I mean, just, getting, so I really love requesting emails and correspondence and, meeting memos, meeting minutes, and just especially if I'm trying to reconstruct a chronology of events, or what's really nice are like, just tracking down sources because, email signatures always have contact info. And so, I think a couple of examples like, contracts for, I've been writing a lot about beavers and climate change and getting a lot of states have contracts with USDA for, murdering or, killing beavers. In Wisconsin, we do it a lot, on trout streams for our fishermen, for recreational purposes. And so just getting the contracts, I've been, waiting on USDA. But what I like to do, if I do have to do a Fed request, I'll also request the same thing from the state. And, oftentimes you end up with different responsive records. And it's nice to kind of compare what, and so you end up with more information usually. And so, yeah, I've gotten contracts back from my local natural resources agency, but nothing on the side of USDA.
And when you say you sometimes get more or less data, can you tell me, or more or less documents, can you give me an example of how that happened?
Yeah, like even like emails are, I mean, obviously like it just depends upon the thoroughness of the staff person, and how much of their email they actually want to go through to get records, unless they have an IT department that's doing a backup of their email inbox. But, I think especially with smaller state agencies or local governments, you just really have like the actual staff person searching their own email for you. And so yeah, when I was looking at farm inspection reports and wanting to know, we had a major polluter in Wisconsin, and I wanted to know kind of how, federal agencies and our state agency were corresponding with the farm and their lawyers, and so just by requesting email correspondence, I, got two basically incredibly different batches of correspondence that fit well together, but there was very little overlap.
Oh, interesting. That's what I was going to say. Was there overlap? So it was this basically the same request to the federal agency and to the state agency, but there was very little overlap in the type of correspondence that came back.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. In what ways was that different? Like
Yeah.
corresponding with the polluter in different ways for about different parts
Yeah,
of
so
the regulation process.
yeah, like sometimes you would have the same people talking, but just a different email chain, or sometimes, I always try to get the attachments to the emails as well. And so, one agency may include, a different inspection report than another, or, different court filings. Yeah, it can just kind of run the whole gamut. Sometimes, if you're doing a subject search and not a author search, you may end up with completely different speakers and writers.
And you mean subject search as in subject line of the email versus the
Yeah, subject lines or
email
or
addresses?
topic or topical word searches. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Izzy, could you talk a little bit about some of the FOIA requests that Edgy has filed, perhaps like in the pursuit of data preservation, but not quite, on the same or fitting into the kind of data that we spoke about earlier?
Yeah, so I will say, as I mentioned to Dylan before the call, I'm personally not super involved in EDGI or PEDP's work for filling FOIA requests for data and information preservation, but I did speak to some people who are. So this is very much information that they have very helpfully given me. And so I will say, kind of two sides of this. The first one is the EDGI Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, more information availability side. So as I said, EDGI does a lot of website monitoring. So we are really looking at what is changing to environmental information on federal websites, what information is no longer available, what information has been reworded with language changes, how is access to the information changed, etc. Um, However, EDGI's website monitoring is happening in a very targeted way. So basically, I personally developed a list of like 5,000 URLs back in 2024 that we thought, like, based off of what these URLs are talking about, whether it be climate change, environmental justice, public health information, etc., this information is vulnerable to being changed or altered. And now we are analyzing those same URLs and seeing that it in fact was true. So we can say a lot about the URLs that we are monitoring, but we don't at all have a representative sample or understanding of the entire federal web space. So as EDGI, we can't really make any sort of, general claims about what has happened to climate information across the federal government because we are only monitoring a very specific subset of information. So coming out of that, one of the FOIA requests that someone from EDGI filled out was actually asking the EPA for a complete list of all of the web pages that they have removed and a list of all of the web pages that they have added since Trump's inauguration. This has been kind of an entire saga of back and forth and waiting and et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, this person did get a response, but it was not at all a complete
Oh,
response of what we were looking for. It was very incomplete and had to follow up and ask for more. And so we are still waiting on that that request to be complete. So that's on the edgy side of things. We also actually FOIA'd for information about what policies and practices the EPA uses for managing its public information. So kind of information about the EPA web guide, how they determine whether information is outdated. And we did get a response on that. And that's just more for our purposes to kind of understand the landscape of regulations and guidelines governing information accessibility and availability on federal websites. On the PDP data preservation side, which this is much more, I asked somebody who does this and they gave me a lot of really helpful information. I would say that FOIA requests kind of happen for three different reasons slash in three different spheres. The first one is it's actually kind of a tactic or a way to slow down the removal or deletion of data. So for example, if we think that a data set is vulnerable of being removed, people will oftentimes FOIA for that data set because there are regulations against tampering or altering with documents and records that have an active FOIA request out for them. So it's kind of a bit of a like resistance or like safeguarding tactic in that way. Similarly, we might have like evidence or suspect that data has been taken offline already, and we might submit a FOIA request because that data should be available even if it's no longer accessible. So if we think data is no longer publicly accessible, we'll FOIA for it to like check that it is still in existence and available. That's kind of the first sphere of FOIA requests for data preservation. The second is that we will file requests to ensure that we are capturing data to its fullest extent. So oftentimes downloading a data set isn't as easy as just like pushing a button, download, and now you have this data. Oftentimes, this data will be kind of present on many different areas of the federal web space. There will be thousands and thousands of files that you have to download. You might have to write code to scrape a website to, download those files and get them. And this is really difficult when there are thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads for getting a complete data set. As a human, you're not positive that you're actually getting a complete picture of that data set or that you got the data set in its entirety. So sometimes it's easier to actually request that data through a FOIA request because it's kind of easier to verbally talk about what you want to capture rather than going item by item and downloading it. So we'll do that to try to access data that we just find really difficult to access, or even just to ensure that data that we did download, we actually got a complete picture of it and we didn't miss any of those downloads. That's the second thing. And then I would say the third instance in which we use FOIA for data preservation is when scraping websites for data is not available. So this especially goes into play when we are trying to recreate data tools. So these are the ways that people, the tools that allow people to interact with and visualize and really analyze data in a more like interactive way. So sometimes these tools that we are hoping to get the underlying code for. Sometimes that code is inaccessible. It's not open source. You can't access it just as a person visiting the website. So you can FOIA for that code. So then that helps us, stand that tool back up. Sometimes the code is just like incredibly complicated. So we cannot, once again, scrape or download or obtain that code to stand up that tool without a FOIA request. So those are the three ways that we use it. And I would say it's very much kind of like a safeguarding tactic, also kind of like a QA/QC, like making sure that we got everything tactic. And then lastly, it's kind of for ease for doing some things that are much more difficult to do in terms of like coding, programming, downloading, scraping, etc.
Yeah, and I think those are three good reasons to file a FOIA request, whether you're a journalist or not a journalist, and just concerned about a data to fill those three potential possibilities. The point that you made about code is really interesting because I think that's a type of request that I've only filed a couple of times, and I don't think a lot of people think about that, like contracts with vendors who are writing code for the government or the code itself is a useful thing to request. And it just hit me that like, yeah, the reason the EJ screen tool looks exactly like it used to is because it's got to be the same code. So you need to get your hands on the actual code that built that in the first place. So yeah, that's a an important type of request. Um, Brittany, is there anything you want to cover in terms of FOIA requests? I know you were coming on and off with some internet troubles and maybe missed some of what Izzy said, but if there's anything specific you want to from the open data project side, like just go over rather than I guess coming straight from Edgy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Izzy said from what I caught of the end of it is spot on. It's FOIA is important for preservation because it gives us a fuller picture. Some of what Bennett was actually saying, I thought was really relevant too, right? Like if you FOIA for something, you actually have a sense of what is the full picture of what it is that you are archiving, because so many times when it comes to having information, even what you can see online and what you can get from an API doesn't necessarily tell the full story. So from a preservation standpoint, FOIA is a super valuable tool. And particularly now, because there is information that has been taken offline and there are websites that have been taken down, just having it as a tool as well for things that maybe we missed when we were archiving. But we can go back and ask for that to come back, and having the ability for that information to eventually be accessible, even though the process can take a really long time and it is, more onerous than what most of us would like. It's still an important tool in our toolkit, both for preservation and broadly for public awareness.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really great point. I remember early on, I think the Data Rescue Project had like a slogan of like, if you see something, save something. And I think it's like that's a good tool to have. And also, if you see something, request something, like both of those things are helpful tools in the preservation process.
One thing
Um,
I will say is, like for instance, EPA has its regional offices. And so I find that the lower on the totem pole you go, more often you can kind of do kind of like a unofficial FOIA by just actually contacting staff members. If you don't get in trouble, sometimes they'll be sympathetic and get you a database, and you bypass the entire national office and it works quite well.
Yeah, in the past, I've had a lot of success like that talking to folks at the regional offices, and they would be able to get a subject matter expert on the line for me now. But I don't know, Bennett, is that more of a burden now when it seems that maybe those offices have cut more of those subject matter experts?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's where I've noticed a huge, like the personal relationships and the loss of that institutional knowledge and subject matter experts. I've noticed far more changes in that versus like if I'm just doing a standard data request or something.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really good point. I'll just like double click on that to say I think what we're going to see in terms of information getting harder to access is not so much like the full deletion of data sets or the full taking down of things, but as the federal government changes what it's requiring from states to report because
Hmm.
they're reducing their standards of, you know, if AQI can be, during the Biden administration was green, but they changed the rate of ppms that it takes to have a green AQI and they raise that, you're going to have the same data set, but it's going to be telling you different things. It's going to tell you things are green when they actually probably shouldn't be green, or if the federal government is changing what what cities and states are required to report by virtue of changing the regulations. I think that's where you're going to start to actually see the really damaging shifts, and that's not so much a data problem. That's a regulation problem, but also a staffing problem. And when you see the cutting of EPA staff and then the trickle down of, you know, state not getting as much funding dollars to be able to do the kind of reporting that's necessary. That's again where we're starting to try to at PEDP monitor how staffing changes. And this is something the Impact Project, which is one of our co-founding members, has done a good job of doing is what do the shifts in staffing mean for actually the kind of data that's able to be collected. So, this goes a bit beyond FOIAing, but it's like if the information is not being collected anymore because you don't have the people on the ground to do that data collection, or the standards of what those people are collecting has shifted, you're going to have less information, and it's not something you can FOIA.
I almost feel like we need an oral history project of all the staff members who can walk people through trying to understand the data that's posted. Because like, for instance, with Echo, if you were to, cite violations, you wouldn't know that all those violations are considered allegations, even though they're labeled, as a violation on the federal website. And so it really would, the loss of that institutional knowledge of someone who's sympathetic to a reporter and could spend an hour and a half telling you all the caveats and things to be aware of when you're interpreting some of these data sets, I think is it's one of the huge tragedies.
Yeah, and that makes me think of in a kind of similar vein. I just dropped a link in a chat, a project I worked on a while back, kind of related to both points. The point you're making, Brittany, and point you're making, Bennett, is this project that I worked on. One of the complicated things about it, the way the project began, is looking at data and then realizing that a state's regulatory numbers were different than what the numbers, the raw data that I was looking at looked like. And then going down this long rabbit hole of realizing, like, actually, if there is a fire that le reaches Louisiana and you want to get those 3 days removed from your yearly annual PM 2.5 averages, you can lobby the EPA. You can write a letter to the EPA and say, hey, this fire affected our air quality in Louisiana. And if you remove these from our averages, you actually bring us back behind the line of regulatory action. And kind of Brittany, like you were saying, that's something really hard to navigate because the data says one thing, but the policies and the way that these states then communicate with the federal EPA is changing as well. Um, I know we're getting close on time, and I want to open up things for questions for the next 10 minutes. Um, like John said at the beginning of the call, if you saw that message about the opioid settlement spending, we are going to do a special edition right post FOIA Friday training on requesting opioid settlement spending from your local governments. So if you're here for that and have been excited to listen to all this environmental data talk, there's more. If you are not here for that, you should still join because this is a really important topic. And John from the Opioid Policy Institute is going to talk about the way that the Data Liberation Project and Muckrock are collaborating to help train more people to see what their local governments are spending on or spending with the money from the settlement payouts that states are getting across the country. So keep that in mind, hold on, but also if you have any questions, drop them in the chat or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. Oh, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Bennett. Great. And if you didn't know what I was talking about, but are wondering, that story is going to be a great example for you to dig in. While we wait for any questions, Bennett, I'll start with you. Do you have any just final tips or tricks for requesters in making requests for environmental data or documents at a local level?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just especially at the local level, trying to get, people on the ground, I find, really tapping into administrative records, like, people submitting public comments. I know with the feds with regulations.gov, all those are posted online already, but sometimes they don't have the, contact information, but at the state level they often do, or people sign-ups for Zoom calls when it's a public hearing. Just, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways I feel like to use the records process, in addition to that, high level data, but just, at all stages of reporting. It's great. Yeah.
Brittany, Izzy, any things that you would leave the listeners with in terms of helping preserve data or finding data that they hope is preserved? Any last thoughts on that?
I will share an interesting tool that I installed recently. I was at the Information Stewardship Forum that the Internet Archive hosted, which was with a whole bunch of different librarians and archivists, etc. And there's a very cool widget that you can download and you can have it be part of your bookmarks bar. And it literally, you click it and it says, send it to the Internet Archive. And so if there's anything that you're on at any point of time that you just want to have archived and immediately sent to Internet Archive, you can download it. It's a simple click. I didn't know it existed until I went to that meeting, but that was, in terms of a very easy, low effort way to be your own archivist. That was a cool little hack I learned. In addition to like welcoming people to more intensive archiving with us through PEDP. But even if you just want to do it on the side, it's a very easy one-click thing.
Is it
Yep.
this Wayback Machine
The
extension?
Wayback Machine extension. Exactly. That's it, Dylan.
Nice. If you see something, say something, or say something, as they say.
Yeah, maybe I'll take this opportunity to shamelessly plug that PUDP is having a datathon actually on August 5th. It's a metadata datathon. So basically, we're focusing on writing and collecting metadata for a lot of the data sets that we've already archived, which obviously helps make these data more useful and usable and continuously accessible farther into the future and are just like really good practices. So you don't need any sort of experience besides like knowing how to use Google Docs. So if anybody is interested, definitely come August 5th. It's on our website and we'll be having a few more datathons. And it's a very, I would say, easy, low barrier to entry way to start learning more about archiving and getting a little bit more involved.
Cool. I think I'll try to join that. I will put that out to the Data Liberation Project volunteers because I bet there's some folks there interested too.
I just thought of another thing with data. Especially if you're getting redactions, I find that it's great to pit states, feds, and other states against each other in the sense of like, based upon their different records laws, you may get de-anonymized data, and with more information if you're requesting the same data set, across multiple jurisdictions.
Any other questions to round us out? All right. Well, now the special speed edition of opioid settlement documents and data is going to begin. So I've promoted Jonathan to host, and we're gonna dig into that. Brittany, Bennett, Izzy, you're welcome to hang on. But if you want to jump off, go for it.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Dylan, for taking the time this afternoon and for everyone on the call or watching the video later. Dylan, are we recording? I think so.
Yep, we're
Okay,
recording.
cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, again, thanks everyone taking the time on a Friday afternoon to learn about the Data Liberation, Opioid Policy Institute, and Muckrock collaboration. So what Dylan and I are going to run through is kind of the nuts and bolts of how this works. But I wanted to start off a little bit with the why. So as you know, opioid settlement money started coming into communities in about 2022, but it's also going to be spent over an 18-year time span. And a lot of that spending is happening in decisions behind closed doors or very delayed in the releasing of that information. So one of the ways that you can unlock that information is something called a FOIA, or Freedom of Information Request. I will caveat, as Dylan knows way better than I do, it can be called different things in different states. But just to to avoid that, I'll just call it FOIAs from now on. So those are Freedom of Information Act requests. And that's your right as a public citizen to understand how the government is spending your money. And that's especially important when it comes to something like opioid settlement money that was won on behalf of you as individuals that are in the community that have been impacted by this crisis. So we created a couple different resources as part of this collaboration, and I'm going to share my screen quick, Dylan.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Cool. Maybe. All right. One of them is this new dataliberation.opioidpolicy.org website, and this kind of walks you through a number of different aspects of the collaboration that we have. So one of the big things to start off with is that you do need to request access. And the reason that you need to request access is as part of this collaboration, the Data Liberation Project and Muckrock are donating free FOIA request templates and resources to help people like get this information. But it's not actually free, right? So Muckrock is putting a lot of their time and resources into it. So the access is just to make sure that people are actually requesting opioid settlement related data as opposed to any of the other things that you can FOIA. Now, of course, at any point as a public citizen, you can FOIA that other information and use Muckrock to do it. You just can't do it with the Data Liberation Project Opioid Policy Institute collaboration. So one of the things that we have to start is this access sort of thing. And all that does is a really quick form that asks a couple key pieces of information, like who you are, how we can reach you, and that way we can pull you into the collaborative. We're going to have monthly office hours the second Wednesday of every month from 12 to 1. So that way you can get any questions asked. You can, of course, ask questions anytime, but that way you can jump on a call and get any questions asked, especially if you're running into some funky stuff. And you can also just, get updates about what's going on with the project overall. We'll also ask you a little bit about your background information about opioid settlements and kind of your plan. So like what do you plan on requesting for? What do you plan on using the data for, et cetera? Because this tool is really for community members to access this information. It's not for like a hospital system that's really ticked off that they didn't get opioid settlement money. They have their own money. They can pay for FOIA requests if they want to. This is to try to empower community members to get this information. And then, of course, trying to help you think through in advance like what your plan is once you get the data. It doesn't have to be super fleshed out because it can be very complicated once the data comes in, but we just want to make sure that you're thinking through it before we get started, because the worst case scenario is you FOIA and request all this information and then you never do anything with it because there wasn't actually a plan in the first place. So we're, of course, happy to help you think through what that plan can look like, but we want to make sure that if we're using the resources that MuckRock and Data Liberation Project are providing, that this information actually gets out into the community. So like I said, super quick, very easy form to fill out. It will take a couple minutes, and then you're in. At that point, you'll be offered an invitation to request one of those training events just to get onboarded and get introduced to the call. Dylan's going to do a quick little demo here in a second to show you how it works. But that one-on-one sort of opportunity can help you feel more comfortable because it's a new thing. It's technology. Some people have different levels of comfort with it, and we really want to make sure that community members can access this information. The other stuff I want to show you on the website are, it has some information about the process, which Dylan's going to walk you through in his demo, but this kind of walks you through each step of the process and what parts you're responsible for, what parts we're helping out with as the collaboration, and then what part is on the government to get that information. So hopefully when you're thinking through that that plan that you have for how to get the information, what you're going to do with it, this process can help you understand what this really looks like, because we understand that not everyone has FOIA'd before. The other thing that we explain is some of the things that we will and will not be able to do as part of the collaboration. So like I mentioned, Data Liberation Project and MuckRock are donating the resources to help with the FOIA-ing. But sometimes, and Dylan, you would know this more than I do, sometimes there's fees associated with it. And sometimes you can ask to request that those fees are waived. Yeah, thank you. And then sometimes they'll say, no, it's going to cost you $10 or whatever. So we don't have any of the resources to help pay if there are those sorts of fees. But if you run into that, reach out and we'll try to help you figure out how to navigate that, right? The other stuff is just kind of we don't have any legal representation. So as was mentioned in the previous call, and if you've done FOIA stuff before, sometimes people can drag their feet or not be compliant, and there might be certain laws in your state that allow you to escalate that. Journalists are really comfortable or familiar with that process. We recognize community members might not be. We don't pay for any of the legal support that you might need, but there might be resources in your state that are available to help you navigate that FOIA noncompliance, because it is a law. They're supposed to comply with it. The other stuff, again, is just that we are not going to do anything non-opioid settlement related. And so as part of these requests, they are all going to be public, which is really cool. But that also helps us make sure that things are staying on track. So if you do, again, we don't anticipate this being a problem, but if you start submitting stuff that's not related to opioid settlements, we're going to block those requests and close your account. So really, please don't do that. I really don't want to do that. And then this other how-to resource, which Dylan's going to walk through much better than I will, but if you're trying to figure out how this all works, the website kind of walks you through how to write a request and how FOIAs really work. So if you're not super comfortable with it, or if you're on the call or watching it later and you're in a community-based harm reduction organization or an advocacy group in the community and you're hey, let's figure out how to do this together, the website kind of walks you through what a FOIA is and how you can use that information. And I think that's it. Dylan, if you want to, oh yeah, because those documents aren't there. If you want to do the demo, I think I stopped sharing. I can hand it off to you. Do we have a chat here? Oh, cool. Yeah. And I'm just going to drop this link in here for that data liberation website.
Sweet. And yeah, at any point, John, if you want to interrupt me and ask a question, if I'm presenting this and you're well, I know someone doing this for the first time will have this question, feel free to interrupt. And same for everyone on the call still, just drop a question in the chat and we can answer it. But yeah, really what I wanted to show you all is just the introduction to MuckRock that you'll need to build off of what John was just walking through a second ago. So like John was saying, one of the really big things we want to solve for in general at MuckRock, and specifically with this project, is for people who really deeply care about some part of government transparency or holding the government accountable, but have heard of FOIA requests or understand that there's a way to ask the government for these documents and may think, I need a lawyer to do that. I don't have the skills. How am I supposed to word that? Who do I send it to? Those sort of questions should not be the reason that you don't end up filing a really important FOIA request. So the idea with this is that Muckrock, as a platform for helping you do that, can smooth out all of that. So you can just focus on what you know about, which is in this case, opioid settlement documents and settlement spending in your state and what you care about, and not have to think so much about the actual request part of it, and where it goes and how you word something. So, like John said, we have an organization. The Data Liberation Project is an organization on Muckrock. You might want to be involved in the Data Liberation Project more generally. You can find us on the homepage and go to Get Involved. This will take you to a few different ways you can get involved. I think the easiest is to join our Slack channel. You can just head there to be involved in the Data Liberation Project more broadly. This is the organization you will join on Muckrock once you sign up. So you will be asked to sign up and make a Muckrock account. I'm not going to go through all those steps. Hopefully that part should be pretty explanatory. But you'll make a Muckrock account and you'll join one of the training or office hours that John mentioned. And we will then invite you to the Data Liberation Project organization on Muckrock. We then have a few different things you can do on Muckrock. What you will be interested in doing is filing that request. And so a request looks like this on Muckrock. You add a title, you have an agency, you can look up even the smallest agencies. I don't know, let's see if maybe my home county, St. Joseph County in Indiana. We even have the St. Joe County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. So we have contacts for lots of agencies in Muckrock, and that way you don't have to go searching for the right email. So you'll just enter in the agency that you want to file to, which is the local government you want to request these spending documents from. And then you'll just have to fill this part out. We have some templates we'll share with you that will make that part easy. So you don't even really have to think about what you're asking for. You just have to find the right agency to file it. Once it's filed, you'll see this is our broader database of requests. Your request will be public here in this database. And you'll be able to track your request in a page that looks like this. So it'll kind of look like an email back and forth. And you'll file your request. You'll see it was sent. You'll see the title. Eventually, the documents will be loaded here in the files portion of the request. And you'll go back and forth just kind of like an email with the corresponding agency until your requests are fulfilled. Let me find a fulfilled request real quick to show you what that looks like. Where is completed? So here's all the fulfilled requests. This one is relevant for overdose data. And you can see here this request was filed. And the Boston Public Health Commission went back and forth with this requester until the request was ultimately fulfilled. And here are all the different files that were produced during that request. Some of these are actually just files that the agency sent as like PDF responses on like legal heading as they were going back and forth. But the documents that you will receive will also be there. Is there any questions that have come in?
Dylan, do you mind showing how to clone the template?
Yes, let me find, give me one second. Let me find the right page for that. John, if you want to cover anything else while I'm quickly looking for that, go for it.
No, the only thing I didn't say was just the website also has like an FAQ that explains all of this. So if you're watching this and you are a journalist, that's super cool. We love that. We love that you're interested in opioid settlements. The Muckrock itself tool is the tool for you, not this data liberation project. So just there's a bifurcation there that's really important. And of course, we're happy to help you out if you're doing that. But yeah, the data liberation project is strictly for community members. And like Dylan said, we're really, really excited to help folks that maybe are intimidated by this process, but have really good or important questions that they want to ask about this spending to be able to unlock it. Because we feel very strongly at the Opioid Policy Institute, and I know Dylan does at Muckrock and Data Liberation Project, that this information should be available. And so this is a really important tool to try to help unlock it. It's not going to happen overnight, that I can promise you. But Dylan's had a lot of success using this tool in West Virginia. I've been playing around with it a little bit, and you can use it for your county, you can use it for your city, township, you can use it for your state government. And what I find it really powerful for is, in particular, if the spending either isn't out there, obviously that's a good place to start, but if it's out there and it's pretty vague, you have the right to like ask a follow-up and be like, hey, you said that you spent this on opioid related remediation. What the hell does that even mean? It was $700,000. Where did that $700,000 go? So you can start to try to get that more detailed information, because as you know, reporting is highly variable everywhere that we live. Yeah, so I don't know, Dylan, did you find an example?
Yeah, so I just shared this link in the chat for the folks that are still on the call. But this article on Muckrock will be a great place for you to start in combination with joining the office hours with John. John mentioned West Virginia. I've been working with some students at a West Virginia University class and filing a lot of requests across the state of West Virginia. And we put together this guide, taking what the students and I learned over a semester and putting it into one place. A really easy way to start filing a request in your community is just to go to the side here with related requests, where we've made all the requests that we filed in West Virginia Public. And you'll see the language that we used. And you can just use the same language. If you're logged in, I'm not logged into Muckrock right now. You'll see a button at the top here in your account that says clone. You can just click the clone button. Right here, you can see duplicate. Um, you can click the clone button and file your own request using this exact same language. Or if you want to workshop this a bit, because maybe you don't want all these things, or you know that I don't know, that there hasn't been meeting minutes of public meetings, or you're less interested in the process and review and approval process, and don't want to hold them up with that part of the request, you can just copy and paste this, edit it at will, and then put it into your own request in Muckrock using the filing platform like I just showed, and file that to your local government. I would also just generally check out this article. It's the same. We go over some of that language, that same language we used, and show the types of documents that came back in West Virginia, just in case you're interested in what might come back. For journalists, we have some information here on turning it into data. But I think that's just as relevant for non-journalists as well, because that answers or gets to the question that John mentioned about, like, what can you do with this when you get it? How do you start exploring it or making sense of it? Because as you'll see in the West Virginia documents that we got emails, we have checks, we have ledgers, we have bank statements, we have application forms. If you use the language that we use in the request, you're asking for a lot of different things to cover, as much as possible of what local governments are producing when they're spending this money. On the other hand, that means you'll get back a lot of different types of documents, and understanding those and knowing what to do with them, or how to get to the bottom of what that means your government is actually doing with that money, is can be a challenge. So there are some kind of tips and inspiration and processes that we used here that you could refer to in doing that.
Dylan, do you mind signing in and just doing one?
Yeah,
Okay.
1 second.
I sent you an example one that I pulled up.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let me get my phone for the two-factor authentication that Muckrock added
Oh,
recently, which is very
okay.
important because
That's good.
your security is important. 1 second.
It is. It is. Okay, I'll vamp. Um, Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to stress, and this is okay to talk about when Dylan's not here, is the Data Liberation Project and Muckrock are donating this resource to us. So if this is something that you find to be valuable, of course we're making it available for free. But if you're able or are in a position that you can donate to the Data Liberation Project and Muckrock, I'm sure they wouldn't mind the support, especially if you find this tool to be useful. The other thing that I just want to stress is we're going to continue to provide additional resources and support, and our plan is to do this over the rest of the time that the opioid settlements money will be dispersed and beyond that. So at any point in the process, if you're looking at this video, like we'll be here to help support you and are really, really excited to do that for community members. So again, if you're able to donate and find this tool to be useful, we have the links on the website to donate to Muckrock Data Liberation Project or Opioid Policy Institute. And look forward to working with y'all on it. Dylan's going to show you just how easy it is to fire off this request. I will say that's the easy part, but that's because Muckrock and Data Liberation Project did a ton of work to build the system to make that easy for you. So if this looks easy, that's a good thing.
Sweet. All right. So let's see here. Let me share my screen again. So we want to file a request. John just sent me some information. I'm just gonna copy that.
Oh, you're not sharing your screen yet?
Not sharing my screen yet. Sorry. Let's see. Let's
That's
do
okay.
it. So now I'm logged into my account. I can just go to file a request. John, this is what John's interested in. Westland City.
Do you want to
Um,
do the clone one or not?
yeah. Sorry, I just want
Okay.
to see what this is first.
Okay.
Okay, spending and other strategies. Okay, so we have some language there, but let's actually go back and clone it like um, you had mentioned, John. That there we go. Now you see the big clone button. Um, and so I'm just going to click clone there, and it immediately takes me to the same request going to the same county. So you're going to want to change some things about this request unless you want to send it to the same county. And Eric is probably uh, not the same person
That'd be
working
fun.
there.
That'd be
Uh,
interesting.
so we'll just change that to hello. And um, we'll change the title. What do you want to call this, John?
Let's just do Westland City opioid settlement money.
Westland City.
And just for folks that can't see, because it's a little small, which is okay, you can see the big parts. This is an example from Michigan that I flagged today when I was pouring through the state of Michigan data that they released in May. It is $797,000, almost $800,000 that they allocated for other strategies, broad measures that support first responders to mitigate, then respond to opioid-related incidents who are at the front lines of the epidemic. It is not clear what that $800,000 is paying. It could be fine, or it could be stuff like an ambulance. It could be stuff like an AED. It could be all sorts of stuff that are on unallowable spending lists that would be problematic. And because the reporting in Michigan is pretty early, this is the first year they've reported it, and there's not a ton of detail, it's worth trying to figure out what the heck did Westland City spend this money on. So this is I think, a good example, and I'm just curious to see what they did.
Um, since we cloned this, everything is coming up exactly as we filed it. And so I'm going to get rid of some of this information. I'll just show you real quick as well. Actually, let me just I'll copy this. If you go to file a request, and you type in your local government here, so we want Westland City Clerk, I imagine is probably who this goes to. I guess we already have their contact information.
Yeah.
And so you can see now it populates and it changes this to the Michigan Freedom Information Act. So I'm going to do it this way just because it goes a little quicker like that for a different state. And then we want to call this Westland City Opioid Settlement Spending. Is that what we call it?
Yeah, that's good. And so what's nice again is, as Dylan showed you with that Westland City Clerk in that blue bar, the Muckrock and Data Liberation Project already built out a huge database of where to send these requests to. So I promise, like, that is one of the biggest things that makes this easier, besides all the tracking and support that Muckrock provides. Just figuring out who to ask becomes like much easier with this tool. And if you can't find your city or county on there, there's a little box on there that like flags that, and it'll send it to Muckrock staff, right, Dylan, and they'll help you figure out who to do it. The other thing that this does is, so some communities, they do things through the mail or whatever, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Dylan, about how like Muckrock will like physically mail the thing if it needs to be mailed.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point that John was mentioning. We have a small support staff that uh, basically they're doing a lot of stuff on the back end that speeds up the things that slow down FOIA requests, which is a agency will only respond through snail mail, or they want to send you a USB or a CD with the documents on it instead of digital documents like PDFs. If that is the case, they will be able to do that, send that to our address in Boston, which is a basically just a mailroom where our staff will then receive that and then scan those documents or plug in the USB drive and upload those documents back into your portal, which you're about to see is what happens when you file this request. So I'm just going to go ahead and file this here. I went through the same language we use in West Virginia and just changed the county name to Westland City. So that's all set there. And you can go ahead and click submit. And then you have a couple minutes to change your request in case you realize you spelled something wrong. Otherwise, you can click send. And now this request is sent. And like I said, if there is any physical documents that the agency wants to send, they can send that and will be re-uploaded here. If it goes through a portal, then you'll see that portal information here. And our support staff will help make sure that happens. This request will be flagged. A lot of city governments are using portals nowadays. And so that will go through the portal, or if they want us to then fill out a PDF and send physical mail to the agency, you'll be able to do that here. Or our support staff will help that happen here. And then again, ultimately, that will be shared in your files. And yeah, you can create a link to share the request with people who are not Muckrock users.
Oh, can you
Um,
share it with me, Dylan?
yeah. Well, first of all, actually, I realized that I'll walk that back because all these requests are going to be public, so all the URLs are the same anyways.
Oh,
Uh,
true.
so your URL to share is just this URL up here. For anyone not involved in this project, say you want to file other requests on Muckrock, or buy requests on Muckrock to file requests about other things, you do have a chance to embargo requests. But because we are pitching into this project to make all these documents public, we want them to really be public, not just filed on Muckrock, but then embargoed. So you will not be able to embargo requests. So your URL will then be this top one, and it will forever stay that way. And anyone who wants to check up on the documents, whether it's a colleague or anyone in your community who's curious, you can just share that link with them. And when the documents are there, they'll be able to see them just the way that you will. Um, Again, this is the really important thing. We think about Muckrock. A lot of people file requests through their email. But then when those documents come through, they are in someone's email and not often or not always made public. And by having a platform like Muckrock, when requests are fulfilled, those documents are made public on that link. And so we just filed this request in Westland, but maybe someone else in Michigan is curious about what's going on there and wants to clone this request. And it's interesting to them to see what comes back in this city, and that's relevant to them in filing another request in their city. None of that would be possible if this were all being filed. These were all requests being filed over someone's email or in that city government's portal. Although those portal requests in a lot of cases should be made public in the portal as well. But this is a place that lives outside of any one requester or any one government.
Yeah, it's super cool, Dylan. And I think the only thing I'll add is with that link, once you have an account, which everybody, once they register and request access to be part of the Data Liberation Opioid Policy Institute team, you'll set up your Muckrock account. You'll be able to get in there. There's a super easy button that says follow. And so I'm following it. There's also a clone button. So I don't know if I'll do it this afternoon because it's a Friday. But I can just start firing off and cloning a bunch of Michigan ones because I live in Michigan and I'm very interested in what's going on there. And then the last piece, I think, besides the office hours, email, contact, routing that stuff through me, Muckrock also has a technical support staff that can help out with some of this stuff. Feel free to do either of those things as you're trying to figure it out. But hopefully the office hours will help out with some of that stuff. And we're here to help support any of the efforts that are trying to unlock this information. Like I said, Opioid Policy Institute has been really committed to making sure that it's transparent. And so with that transparency comes accountability, which is really important, we think, because this money is our money and it needs to be spent well. And then, of course, Muckrock and Data Liberation Project are super into just freeing up this information. So, and any information that's available. Again, if you're able or willing and you find value in this tool and can donate, I do have those donate links in there, but it is free. So you don't even have to. Dylan, was there anything else that you wanted to add, or if there's time for questions, if folks have questions about stuff, we could definitely answer those.
The last thing I'll just add is if you're seeing this in the future or you're on right now and you start filing these requests, I know you'll talk with John at some point, but I would also love to hear from you. My email is dylan@muckrock.com, DILLON at muckrock.com. You can find me in Muckrock Slack as well. But yeah, like John was saying, we really want to give people the tools to be a part of government transparency, to really participate in holding people accountable. And we would love to hear about how you're doing it. And I personally would love to hear about how you're doing it and what's working for you and what you do with these documents once you get them.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dylan. Appreciate everyone that's watching this and interested in helping out with this. Again, the main website is dataliberation.opioidpolicy.org. So if you go to that, you'll find all of this information. You'll find this video, and you'll be able to request access to join the team. And really appreciate this collaboration, Dylan. As you know, we've been very excited about it. So let's start. I guess we're one request in, and let's see how we go. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thanks, y'all.